Rajesh, good evening.
Good evening, Janet, and thanks for having me here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolute pleasure. So, Rajesh, I want to, since this talk between you and me is about how do we get our teams to embrace technology, before I talk about your technology, I want to learn a little bit about you. So, the quintessential question, take us through your tech journey, please.
Yeah, sure. I have been incredibly lucky to be part of three distinct opportunities in my career. Obviously, the first leg of my career, I started as a software engineer. I was writing software for Amazon.com in Seattle. And there, obviously, I built a lot of features in the app, a lot of large-scale distributed systems back in supply chain, warehouse management systems. And that was one leg of my journey that served me very well later. And then there's another distinct opportunity that I got to set up India development centers and also grow them. The growing part was more with Intuit, but the setting up of the India Dev Center, much before even Amazon entered India. And that obviously gave me a very unique muscle and learning. Especially when people are not familiar with what Amazon is, right? And you have to build products for global consumers. How do you attract talent and how do you grow the teams? How do you build innovation without really using the products on a day-to-day basis? I think, but the last and the one that I'm truly grateful is the opportunity to build for India consumers, whether it was part of Jungly or the Amazon.in or now Nykaa. It has been one wild ride. I wouldn't trade it for anything else. The opportunity to transform how India buys and sells.
That's an interesting point you bring up, Rajesh, because you're building apps for 1.4 billion people.
Sure.
And at the same time, you want to make an app immersive.
Sure.
How do you make something immersive for 1.4 billion people?
That's a great question. And especially since I represent the technology organization, I firmly believe there are many ways in which you can run a technology organization. You can obviously be business model focused. You can be very technology driven. And these are all fantastic ways. There's nothing wrong in it. What has served us well, especially at Nykaa, is to root our technology organization also in deep customer immersion. And I'll share three concrete examples how we do it. Before building anything at Nykaa, we do profound research. For example, personalization is a big thing. When you come to the app, we don't want to show the same discovery experience to every consumer. You want to personalize it based on who the consumer is. Even before going after that problem and talking about machine learning or collaborative filtering, the thing that we did was we invested a lot of time in understanding personas of users who shop beauty. And we came up with interesting learnings. And the other nice thing is we have fantastic relationships with our brands and they share their consumer research as well. And that helps us identify key personas, someone who would want to be bold with their makeup, the choice of colors, the kind of products they use, versus someone who would want to be a little more demure. And that, using that as a knowledge, then you go and look at the digital footprint of the people, how they buy, and then map it to the personas, and then use that knowledge to personalize the experience for someone buying similar books, right? Similar products. I think that's where magic happens. So research. The other thing that has also served us well is what we call as walking in customer shoes. For example, most of us do what we call as warehouse tours or visits. I personally went to warehouse. I do pick customer orders myself. The last time I did, I realized to pick 3 customer orders, I had to walk a lot of distance. And I was like, how can I use technology to optimize the pick path of the warehouse associate? How can I stack the most popular products in near vicinity so that I don't have to walk a whole lot of distance? So walking in customer shoes is another thing that serves us well. There is another third interesting thing that we do. We pay a lot of attention to customer anecdotes. and it works really well. Because customers inherently, they have a very divine discontent in them. Even if things are good, they keep saying, I want things faster, I want things cheaper. And that pushes the envelope, right, in terms of innovation. We listen to customer calls. Recently, we started doing something like, for most of our critical review meetings, we start with a customer anecdote, a pain point. These are some of the things that are helping us build a lot more customer empathy. And we use that to delve deeper into the problems and then elevate it with technology.
Rajesh, I want to pick up from something that I'm hearing constantly. Talk
Sure.
about the customer, walk in their shoes, develop empathy. These are all very human emotions, something that's quite the antithesis of an event that's called intelligent automation. It's something Kirti also alluded to, understand the problem before you get
Absolutely.
into the solution. And yet, one of the operating tenets that you have at Nykaa is when it comes to technology, be fearless.
Yeah.
But now, with all due respect, it's
Yeah.
easy for you as part of the tech team who has your finger on the button to say, be fearless with technology.
Yeah.
Speaking very transparently, my tech team sends me an email, I get scared to open it. What changes are going to be announced in that? How do I have to change my life to accommodate for this? How do you marry the need to be fearless with technology with everything else that you spoke about?
Sure.
Developing empathy, not just for your customer, but also for your teams who need to embrace that change.
That's a very great question, Janet. So I think at least the way we look at building that fearlessness with technology is in three ways, right? I mean, in the previous panel, we had extremely good insights on how Gen AI is really like transforming things. And if you look around, there are way too many external trends that keep happening. Before that, we had like blockchain and then the whole Meta and Web3. And there are two ways in which companies react to these external trends, right? And sometimes when you are in a certain phase, you also might not necessarily have a lot of tech muscle. Or sometimes when you're too big, you might also be resistant to noticing and embracing some of these trends. And the problem with that is you risk becoming obsolete. And I'm not saying you should jump on every trend, but some of the ones that are real, they are unmistakable. You will never miss them. Like we are talking about generative AI. And one of the things we need to do is the sooner we embrace them versus resist and fight them, I think you have a great chance of making that trend as a tailwind than a headwind. And on the same thing, right? Recently we have done a hackathon in partnership with Microsoft on this specific theme, Gen AI theme. There were at least 5 super interesting ideas. And you don't need massive team. We had like a handful of ML engineers, and they spent like couple of days. And some of the ideas were almost like ready to at least try it as a pilot and put it in the hands of the customers. So that's what I mean by being technically fearless, one aspect of it, embracing trends versus fighting them. Then there is something that I truly believe in, as a company, when you start growing bigger, the scale of your experiments should also naturally increase. And which means with that, the failures also will increase because experiments by nature have a slight probability that they might fail. And how comfortable are you, right, with experiments and failures? Almost to the extent that can you even celebrate some of your failures? So that's another thing, that we consciously, try to, watch out for our experiments and even sometimes recognize and celebrate the failures and the learnings. And there's one last thing I would want to add is the commitment to engineering excellence. It's not easy. When I say engineering excellence, there are a lot of jazzy things you want to build on the app, right? Add new features. But everything that happens behind the curtains to make your app resilient so that it doesn't crash. When you open it, it doesn't take a lot of time to load, or making it super secure so that your information doesn't get leaked. All these things, they take a lot of time. And in the end, customers might not even immediately notice it, but your commitment to creating a super strong, resilient, secure, performant app. These are some of the traits I believe as engineering leaders we need to champion.
Rajesh, you spoke about being an engineering leader.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it's different for different organizations. Abhinav also spoke about during his panel that for a company that's a cloud native company, it's probably easier to adopt such change versus a Kotak Mahindra, for instance, which is a regulated entity. They have to explain certain things to the regulator.
Sure.
You've spent the initial part of your career at a 0 to 1 company, Junglee, Amazon. And now you're at Nykaa, which is going on the next stage from 1 to 10. So are the tools that you use to manage such change different at the life stage of an organization?
I think that's a great question. I think that really, I think it's a measure of your leadership is how well can you navigate change and how well you can carry, not just your teams, but also your stakeholders. I don't know if I have a magic silver bullet, Jeanette. I'll start with this powerful quote from Greek mathematician Archimedes and a physicist, of course. I think we all know this quote, right? Archimedes said, give me a lever that is long enough and a place and a fulcrum, where I can put that long pole and a place to stand, and I'll move the earth. And that's a very powerful quote. So a lever has the intrinsic ability to move something at a distance. And I use that analogy to kind of explain what you're just alluding to, right? Luckily, there have been some organizational levers that have served me well. I'm sure there are other ways, in bringing about some of these change. It's very interesting if you look at these levers, like the Archimedes analogy, there are some really long levers. They can actually make big changes. And the challenge with exercising long levers is you get a lot of resistance in the organization. And then there are these medium-sized levers and there are these small-sized levers. I specifically, have this toolkit, in my toolkit, the long levers are typically aligning at a mental model level, getting organizational buy-ins through decision-making frameworks, operating tenets. All these are the longest levers. So the harder the change is, I fall back on those levers, but those are the levers that get the most resistance as well, So you have to invest a lot of time. And then the medium-sized levers are typically around goals, incentives, rewards. Again, very useful. They might not move things as much, but again, super critical. And then slightly lower would come what we call typically things around resources, headcount, budget. And the key is to flex all these levers in unison. Let me bring it to life through a small example, right? Very recently, one of the things we tried to do at Nykaa as a big change was to bring about more differentiation in our talent calibration. And what we wanted to do was to identify a small set of people whom we would call as the top tiers. And again, try to identify the bottom performers and create that separation. And we knew that was important because it's very natural, you as you grow, you have some bottom performers that you need to eventually invest and turn around things. Similarly on the top performers and probably invest more on them. And we spent a lot of time on mental model alignment, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to achieve it. We had to do multiple discussions saying why this differentiation is important, how we have to fast track a few people. Eventually there is only going to be a finite amount of money, how you want to give it away. And that helped us, right? Later on then we set goals saying if you have a team of certain size, you have to achieve that kind of differentiation. But that I think brings out how we were playing at multiple levels, using all these levers to drive that change. I use these levers typically to drive any organizational change.
But Rajesh, as a CTO, you only
Sure.
have limited visibility on the organization.
Sure.
So while you have the levers and while you probably want to take a decision about which of the three levers to use, how do you, as a CTO with this limited vision, know which levers to move at which opportunities?
That's a great question. I think it depends on the type of the challenge. Uh, if the challenge is, I typically look at challenges as leadership challenges and more like a managerial challenge. Leadership challenges typically are very hard. They typically involve mindset changes. They typically involve cultural changes, and invariably you will have to fall back on these larger levers. You'll have to strive for a lot of alignment at mental model levels, principles. You debate a lot, you get resistance, you go back again, you try to understand other counterpoint, you over communicate. And then there are other challenges. For example, let's say for our new hires, we traditionally give a backpack, right, for their laptops. Tomorrow we decide to change that to something else like a laptop sleeve. It's not a great leadership challenge. I don't get a lot of resistance. And those changes, I handle them very differently versus maybe changing our policy on return to work, remote versus hybrid. So depending on the type of the challenge, we decide which levers to use, maybe a combination of them.
Drilling down into the subject matter really,
Sure.
Rajesh, a lot of the terms are used interchangeably, right? Automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning. How do you as a leader think about these three terms? How do you, and more importantly, how do you train your team to think about these three terms and what you want to implement in your organizations?
Yeah. So at the crux of it is data to begin with. And you'll have to obviously invest a lot in having clean data and democratizing the data to make a lot of decisions. And then, at least at Nykaa, we have a three-pronged or a three-tiered approach. I'll briefly talk about, we obviously have a large analytics team. This is the team that is actually looking at data and doing a lot of deep product analytics and identifying the right signals. For example, if a customer comes to the website or the app, is she a premium customer? Things like, does this customer have a propensity to reject or return items quite often? And that's what the analytics team is doing. And then we obviously have our data sciences, machine learning and data sciences team. And this is the team, that is more often than not building models that directly, interface with the customers. Whether it is in terms of personalizing your search, showing you the right kind of product recommendations, going into the supply chain aspects, trying to figure out which products to stock up in which way. And that's what the machine learning is doing. And now the third function that we are, it's a small early stage, now we are getting into generative AI as well. I just talked about a couple of experiments that we are doing. So depending on the kind of the problem, it is tackled by one of these three, if I may use the word, pods in our organization. And yeah, automation invariably, it runs through our company. We have gone through an evolution. Very early stages when tech is a premium, right? Their bandwidth, and you have to build a lot of features. So you save a lot of tech bandwidth. So you try to solve some of these challenges using people, right? We typically use the phrase, throw people at the problem. And then you slowly get the courage and say, okay, let me prioritize that one task, which is very laborious, which is very error prone. Then slowly evolve and say, let me graduate from picking tasks to identifying an entire workflow that can be automated.
Rajesh, with an eye on the clock,
Yeah.
I'm going to take on the wrath of the organizers
Sure.
because I want to push this conversation a little bit more.
Sure.
I feel we were hitting the crux of it, right?
Yeah.
Start by throwing people at a problem.
Yeah.
And then train the machine, train the system.
Yeah.
Which has led to this fear today that inevitably people will lose jobs when it comes to AI.
True.
And this is probably the source of a lot of resistance against AI.
Yeah.
Is this something you're facing as well, and how do you tackle it?
I haven't faced such a resistance in my organization. because for us fundamentally, the people today who are doing some of the manual work are very talented people as well. And what we have always realized in our experience is, I think we leverage their expertise to codify the rules, and then their expertise to take those rules and then evolve them into models as well. So in some sense, what is happening is it is giving them a lot more bandwidth to help us better our heuristics, our rule-based engines, and also to help us train the models. Let me give a very quick example, right? Like in the past, whenever customer orders had a certain criteria that could potentially make them fraudulent, maybe like, very high order value or from a certain pin codes or whatever, we would flag them. And before shipping them, we would have a team that would go and call the customer, do a lot of verification to make sure this is a genuine order and we should be shipping it. And over a period of time, obviously, we built rules to automate it. We also built models. But the best part of it is all these people who have been calling the customers, figuring out whether it's genuine or not, have built so much knowledge that they are the ones who really helped us build these rules and heuristics and models. So at least for us, it has been extremely symbiotic, and it is allowing them to do more higher order work. So for us, we haven't been facing such a concern.
Adding value to the value chain. Thank you very much, Rajesh. Very, very insightful conversation.
Thank you.
Handing over now to Ruchi.
Yeah.
And we carry on with this discussion on automation through the evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.